Thank you for joining us on our journey here to preserve the history of mixed martial arts. When I wanted to take on this project, I needed help. I brought in one of my favorite matchmakers, Miguel Iterade, and the MMA detective, Mike Davis. So to do this, we've been able to preserve history. Welcome and enjoy.
Hey, Miguel Iterade, back here on the Lights Out podcast. MMA detective Mike Davis off to the side here, and we are on another deep dive. Chris Lytle, Bare Knuckle Land has called him off, but we couldn't resist. We got a really special guest, a behind-the-scenes person, in most eyes, also the founder of ATT American Top Team. Dan Lambert is with us. Dan, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
And yeah, I'm doing great. I'm very glad to connect with you again here. And I do think this is going to be a fascinating interview because, in my estimation, you may not have heard the name Dan Lambert if you're just an MMA fan or whatever it is. But in my estimation, you're talking about probably one of the top 10 most influential people in the sport. With us since the 90s, you know, doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes, obviously with ATT, but there were shows and things like that. And, you know, he's seen his ups and downs. And if anybody's got stories on this sport, it's this man right here. I'm going to let the MMA detective take over.
So, Dan, you're actually known as being an incredibly private person. What kind of made you flip that switch and kind of cross over? I know you're obviously doing AEW stuff right now, but what made you comfortable enough to make that transition?
I would say the main impetus of the transition was how much I hated the Black Zillions. And when the UFC called and asked if we would do the Ultimate Fighter season, I just couldn't turn up the chance to try to expose some of those guys for how much I disliked them. So that was probably it. Up until that point, you know, we had never, you know, our team's always been a team concept. You know, it's not Dan's team or Conan's team or this team. It's always, you know, just a generic team, American Top Team. We try to make it about the fighters. We try to make it about the coaches. You know, it's all about, you know, it's not about individuals. It's about our team. So there was really never a reason for any individual to try to take any type of bigger role, at least publicly. But when they did that season, you know, it was kind of hard to, you know, hide in the background when it was focused around a strong dislike for people. So I guess hate's a pretty good motivation sometimes.
Well, that took place in 2015. But the thing is, it's like you have been established for almost 2 decades at that point. Did you come up with this idea for the tough season, or was it the UFC's idea? Because that only really, in terms of publicity, benefited them more than it ever could have you.
It wasn't my idea. I was sitting home watching, I think, like a Monday Night Football game or something like that. And I got a call from somebody at the UFC. Is like, hey, how much do you hate those guys? And I'm like, a lot. And they're like, well, you hate them enough to do a show against them and see if you guys can, you know, beat them head to head. And I'm like, yeah. And that's kind of how the show came about.
Okay. Yeah, that definitely helped them more than it did you. But why don't we bring it back to the beginning? When did you know you were hooked? What was the first event that you had ever seen?
Well, the concept of mixed martial arts for me really came through pro wrestling, you know, and watching the, you know, the shoot promotions, UWF, UWFI in the 80s. You know, Pancreas started right around the same time as the UFC. So I started off watching those because I tape traded. I used to trade VHS tapes. I would record stuff I got access to here in the United States, and I would trade it with guys who had access to All Japan, New Japan, over in Japan. And then they started sending me UWF and Pancreas, and I started to get hooked then. So when the UFC came about, I had already started, you know, the drug a little bit and followed through the Wrestling Observer, following their coverage of those. And so the UFC was really the first, you know, UFC 1 was really the first true shoot show that I guess I watched.
Wow. And then what was your first live event that you had attended?
I want to say it was like UFC 9, but that I'm not sure if that predated the first WEF show that Jamie Lavine did. I went to that one as well, helped him out with that show, and that was also in the 90s. Maybe I couldn't tell you the exact day, so I don't know if it was one of Jamie's shows or if it was that first UFC that I went to.
Okay, how did you hook up with Jamie Lavine? So Jamie Lavine, for everybody that knows, he was a famed WEF promoter, very notorious. You've heard dozens of stories on our podcast about him. How does he wind up in your line of vision?
His uncle was a dentist and shared a lawyer with me. And I got a call from a lawyer one day, and my lawyer, and he basically said, "Hey, would you mind if I gave your number out to a guy, one of my clients, his nephew is in the MMA business. I know you've got a jiu-jitsu team and some of your guys fight. Would you mind if we linked you guys up?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, no problem." And I got a call from Jamie Lavine and became one of his sources for whatever.
Well, yeah, I remember, when you rolled into Evansville, that, he was putting on elite fights. So you can say whatever you want about this guy in terms of like the way he did business. Maybe you want to talk about that, maybe you don't, but in terms of the fights he was actually putting on, he was, right there on par with the UFC, really.
He knew the sport.
He did. Jamie put together some really good fight shows. I mean, there was a show that we did with him in, I think it was Rome, Georgia. Maybe it was WF Platinum, I want to say, but Minotauro was on it. He fought Jeremy Horn. Pat Miletich was on it. Matt Hughes was on it. I mean, the list of guys that was on that show. I'm not sure if Rich Franklin was on that show or the one before. Jens Pulver was on it. I mean, just the list of guys that were on his shows were just crazy. That was one show.
Yeah, Aaron Riley was on that one too. Aaron fought Henzo's student. So, yeah. So now there's always the rumor that you were helping Jamie out with funding some of the shows and stuff, and that goes without saying. Did you ever feel ripped off by him? Because I'll tell you who told me the story, because Dean Thomas always said that you would get a list that'd be like, Dean Thomas is making $5,000, and that Dean would actually take home $500. And is that something you could corroborate? And when did you feel that from Jamie? Because that's kind of slimy.
Yeah, it's kind of slimy. It's a true story. I remember talking to a couple guys about what they made later on down the road and hearing that it was different than what was on the budget and what got paid. Monty had some stories that he shared with me later. But I mean, Jamie was what Jamie was. He was a hustler to the nth degree. He was a nice guy. He was a fun guy to be around. I mean, people call him a little bit of a con man, but most con men are pretty good at gaining your confidence. That's why they call them con men. They're charming, they're funny. We had good times. We saw a hell of a lot of great fights, put on some great shows with him. But he had a way about him. He was not always on the up and up. And I mentioned his uncle. When I got news of his passing, probably about 2 weeks went by, and I'm sitting at my desk at work, and my cell phone rings, and I look at it, and it's got the caller ID, and it says Jamie Lavine. And I answered the phone, and I said, "You fucking scumbag, you faked your own death. Holy shit. Where are you?" And it was his uncle on the phone. He said, "No, this is his uncle. I was just going through his contacts and letting some of his friends know something or other." I don't remember what it was. I was like, "Oh shit, sorry."
That's hilarious.
But that's Jamie. That's
Jamie. I mean, you got to laugh at it because that's Jamie.
When you mentioned it too about like having fun and just crazy stuff at the shows, that Rome, Georgia show, he bought like this annoying yippy little dog with him everywhere he went. He had it in his hands, in his hotel room, everywhere. It's like nutty things like that. It's like, and if you asked him a question about pay or anything like that, he had more attention. He'd run off with the dog. This is crazy.
I guess he was ahead of the time, bringing dogs places he shouldn't be bringing.
Yeah. One interesting aspects of your relationship with Jamie Lavine is the UFC at this time was not doing enough shows in order to, keep all the fighters happy, allow them to, work, without work and fighting full time. You had funded the match between Pele and Pat Miletich in the WEF when Miletich was the UFC champion. Do you remember that fight?
I believe that was on the Rome, Georgia show, wasn't it, Miguel?
Was it? Okay. Pat Miletich got his hand, Pele got his hand raised while Miletich was the UFC champion. Did you have any conversations with the UFC at this time over that fight?
Well, you telling me that UFC funded it's the first I've ever heard of that, because back then I thought I funded it. So
No,
that
you
may have
funded
been
it.
that
You
may have been
funded
another story from Jamie where he got paid twice on the fight. I don't know. No, I don't remember there being any controversy about that being for a UFC title or anything along those lines. I mean, if I recall the fight, Militich's back went out on him and he had to stop halfway through, like right at the end of the first round. But I don't recall that being like for a UFC title.
No. I think I misspoke. He was the UFC champion at the time and lost while outside of the organization. And that's quite a big black eye for an organization like the UFC.
When now it would be certainly, but back then, what were they doing? 3 shows a year? It's like, I don't think they cared. I think they were happy to have one of their fighters get paid by somebody else to do something.
Yeah, I figured maybe that could have been a rub with yourself and them, because you were back in Jamie. In 2001, Bob Meyerowitz sold the UFC, to Zuffa, the Fertittas, and Dana. You were known, obviously, to have put your hat in the ring with that. I had always wondered, John Perretti came forward and said that he had a secret partner in regards to it. Was that you trying to get a second seat at the table, or did Perretti have somebody else with him?
That was me with Perretti. He reached out to me.
Okay.
God, I don't know who put us together or not, but he reached out to me and said that he had a deal in place to buy the UFC and needed a partner. And I went and met with him a few times, and we came to an arrangement on, what our deal would be internally. And then we went and negotiated the deal with Meyerowitz.
Were you surprised that the Fertittas, you got that at the time?
Well, we had the deal we made was $500,000 to Meyerowitz. We were buying 51% of the company. Meyerowitz was going to keep 49%. And I was putting up an additional $1 million as a loan to the company, which would go to fund their losses while they were still trying to get back on pay-per-view, because they had lost their pay-per-view funding. So they were, the only access they had was DirecTV, which was in so few homes at the time, it wasn't much money. So they were trying to get back on cable pay-per-view, because John McCain spearheaded an effort to get them removed from cable, called up his buddy who ran one of the major cable companies out of New York or something, and got them to take it off, and then everybody followed suit. It's kind of funny. You could buy porn on pay-per-view back then through cable, but God forbid you buy an MMA fight. So we made the deal, and we were in the due diligence stage. I had to put up 200,000 of the 500,000, had to make that available to them immediately, because they were doing the show in New Jersey that the commissioner, Larry Hazard, agreed to temporarily sanction one show, if you recall, in New Jersey through the athletic commission, and the Nevada Athletic Commission was going to send some reps to watch it. And if it went well, they were going to consider, sanctioning an event. And then everybody, the plan was if it got sanctioned in Nevada, all the other commissions would follow suit. If they got sanctioned by the commissions, they could get back on pay-per-view. So of the $500,000 fee to purchase the company, $200,000 was up front. They needed that money to fund that show. So I paid $200,000 immediately. They used that to do that show in New Jersey. And right after that show, I stopped getting return calls from Meyerowitz's side. His brother was a lawyer in New York who was handling the transaction from his side. And I couldn't get anything from him. I couldn't get anything from Meyerowitz. It's just like they stopped returning my calls. They were playing some games leading up to it with respect to giving me the contracts and, every piece of due diligence that I offered. I'd ask for shit. It would come scribbled on a piece of paper. It was kind of a joke. But right after that show, it went dark. They stopped returning all my calls. So we had a closing date set where I was going to have to put up $1 million. I was going to have to give them the extra $300,000 for the payment. Plus I was going to have to put $1 million in escrow to fund the company over the next 12 months. And I couldn't even get a return call. So I knew something was up. So I started digging around, and I eventually found out that the Fertittas had come in and signed a deal with Bob to buy 100% of the company. I didn't even know who the hell they were at the time. So I started doing some research on them. And then I saw their connections to the Nevada Commission and who they were and how deep their pockets were. And I basically said, well, fuck, I'd rather these guys buy it than me. I just didn't want to go out of business. I wasn't trying to blow this thing up and turn it into $1 billion major sports franchise. I just didn't want to see it go out of business. So shit, I wanted a place for my guys to fight and wanted the company to go on. And I thought, if these guys want to do it and lose a bunch of money out of their pocket and hope that it eventually turns around, great, let them do it. But can I get my $200,000 back? And the answer from Meyer turned out to be no on that. So I ended up having to sue him for that and litigate that for a few years. But I was happy to back off when I saw who was getting involved, because I thought, man, these guys have a much better chance than I would have of making this thing successful. They'd have better access to getting it sanctioned, getting it, put through the commissions, and hopefully getting a TV deal. And that was obviously going to be the key. So it didn't bother me in any way, shape, or form losing the deal. I didn't like getting screwed out of my $200,000.
Yeah.
Well, you paid for the audition for the Fertittas.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah, that's what you did.
Now, let me ask you, because at this point you had a show in Florida that was pretty officially your show, and you still probably were helping out other shows and stuff. Did you envision that the UFC would be running weekly shows and that you would basically be able to sunset the promotions? Because that's kind of what it seems like happened. You put up fights for your guys when there weren't any, and then there wasn't a time when there weren't any anymore. Is that a fair transition as to why you pulled out of promoting, or were you just burnt out?
That's funny. Nobody really ever asked me what my plan was if the deal had gone through. My plan was to call WWE and offer half of my stake to Vince McMahon for free if he would use his connections to get it on television. That was my plan. And if that didn't work, we were just going to stick with the same plan of doing a few shows a year, 3-4 shows a year, try to keep them small, not spend a lot of money, and just work on getting it sanctioned. Because once it got sanctioned, it get back on pay-per-view, eventually get some type of TV slot like pro wrestling. Pro wrestling historically always used television to build up to their pay-per-views. It's kind of gone full circle with them now. There really are no true pay-per-views in WWE. That's all network driven, and they make all their money on television. But back in the territory days, the pro wrestling promotions actually paid for their television just to drive their house shows and their ticket sales, which is where all their revenue was. And then when pay-per-view became popular, then they would use the television to set up their pay-per-views. Now all their money comes through network television deals. That's where all their revenue comes from. And, AEW still does a few pay-per-views a year, and WWEs are part of their, $10 a month network fee. But that was my plan, try to get it on television somehow to build the pay-per-views that we would do. And then once the pay-per-views got successful, then try to add shows if I wasn't able to make a deal with WWE. But, none of that ended up happening. The reason I got into promoting shows is we were going and we were helping out other shows to get our guys fights. And then one of our guys said to me, hey, between flying out to these shows and bringing everybody out and getting them out, we could do our own show in Florida, for probably the same amount of money. So as you know, we reached out to you guys to help us do that and set up the fights. And that's how AFC was born. And then we started doing AFC, and the plan was just doing it to get people fights. We just wanted to get our guys fights, and we weren't trying to pad records. We wanted to see if guys could fight and succeed, which is why, a lot of our guys lost a lot of those fights. We weren't trying to get them, easy tomato cans as opponents. We were trying to match them up accordingly and get them ready for bigger shows and, ferret out the ones that would make it and wouldn't make it. And after
Dan, if I may interject, you guys would send your murderers to take care of all the big ticket sellers. I remember, because I'm from the Midwest, being at these regions, your guys would walk in and all uniformed out in their tracksuits, and the local people, they don't know what they're getting into. Our guy's gonna beat them up, and I'm just sitting there I don't think you're reading this situation right. You guys murdered ticket sellers all over the country for free on your dime.
But we didn't make those fights, we were just sending the guys. We said put them up against whoever you want, But yeah, we started to get a little bit of a less of a welcome mat at some of those shows that we were going out to when that happened. So we started doing our own shows, And when the Ultimate Fighter hit and the UFC started doing well, a lot of new promotions sprung up. I mean, for a while, Miguel, you guys were like the only show in town. And then there were, you and Monty, a couple shows out there. And then we started doing our shows. There weren't a lot of options out there for guys to get fights, but I never promoted a show in Florida that I made money on. Hell, I think I may have broken even on 1 out of the 20 shows we did. So when a lot of shows started springing up around the country, small little local shows, because the UFC started to become popular, then I looked at it and said, well, shit, I don't need to do shows at all. I got plenty of places to get my guys fights. So we backed off of doing shows then.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you, sorry, Mike, but let me ask you now, let's talk about your guys, because along this is the creation of American Top Team. And we have an inception story, I think, from Alex Davis. It's a pretty good source, but I'd like to hear it from you. Like, when I knew you, you were already a brown belt. So, aside from the respect you command in one way, you also command it in the other way, which is different than a lot of promoters. But how did all that start out? I heard that you kind of got privates, and then, you were going at 7 a.m. for like judo privates with Alex and Liborio. Why don't you fill us in on how you got involved with Liborio, who's the guy who's Top Team's face now?
Well, first of all, Liborio hasn't been part of our team for like 7 years.
Yeah, he left.
So he's been gone a long time, but he was certainly there when we made the switch over to American Top Team and started bringing in a lot of fighters and went from being like a pure jiu-jitsu team into an MMA team. Basically, in 95, I was watching Perretti's organization, Extreme Fighting, and did his first show. And Conan Silveira won the heavyweight tournament, and they said he had a gym in Miami. So as soon as I heard that he had the gym in Miami, I'm watching UFC for a couple of years and watching the Pancreas and the UWF, and you see what the jiu-jitsu guys and the grapplers are doing to everybody. You're thinking, wow, this is the coolest thing in the fucking world, man. I want to learn this shit and be Superman. So I'm like, I'm going to go find this place. I couldn't hop on the internet and find anything back then. So I'm like looking in the yellow pages, trying to find Conan's gym in Miami Beach, and couldn't find it. Ended up getting in my car and just driving down there looking for it, and ended up going into some type of karate equipment store or something and asked them if they knew where it was. And they did. And I went down to his gym and signed up with him and started taking private classes with Conan and his brother, Marcelo. That was back in 95. And for the next, probably the next 4 to 5 years, we were primarily a jiu-jitsu team. We used to we had probably a group of like 12, 13 guys who trained a lot together. And that's when Naga started going across the country. And, we would just go to wherever there were tournaments and we'd compete. And some of the younger guys then decided they wanted to fight. So we had a couple of guys fighting, not a lot. And then in 2000 is when Liborio came over to the U.S. He just wanted to come over for like 6 months and crash in a place and learn English. And he was recuperating from some type of injury. So he came over and started training with us. And, not too long after that, we started thinking, man, we really see this sport as something that's growing. The MMA side is way more fun than the grappling side. It's got a lot more upside in our opinions. Why don't we see if we can just kind of like ride the wave of this sport and become an MMA team and grow along with the sport, which was primarily UFC at the time. It still is, I guess. So Liborio decided to move over full time. Him, Marcelo, Conan, and myself. We switched over from Silveira Brothers Jiu-Jitsu to American Top Team. Liborio was one of the early guys with Brazilian Top Team, so we were kind of like a cousin of them. He gave up his interest down there and started over here, and then we just kind of grew with the business.
So Liborio had quite a big reputation back then, and there was a rumor pre-American Top Team. I don't know if you were there or not, but I hope you had heard about this, that Liborio and Rickson had a private rolling session in California. Were you there for that, present for that?
No.
Did you ever hear about it?
I did not. Never heard that story.
I heard it was pretty one-sided.
Back then, MMA was basically jiu-jitsu. The grapplers were winning everything back then. And it's kind of funny how crazy the sport's still really young in the context of a major sport, and it's evolving really quickly. In my opinion, karate's more important in MMA right now than jiu-jitsu is. People don't win fights from their backs anymore. You still see some submissions from top, but shit, most of those submissions are catch wrestling positions or very low-level jiu-jitsu positions. It's just crazy how the sport's evolved. So, back then, Liborio was a jiu-jitsu guy. Conan was a jiu-jitsu guy. Marcelo was a jiu-jitsu guy. That was basically our coaching staff at the very beginning. You fast forward now, and I think we probably got maybe 17 or 18 coaches on our payroll, and one of them is a jiu-jitsu guy. We've got wrestlers, we've got striking coaches, but we got a ton of good grapplers in the gym, but we've got one main Pablo as our main jiu-jitsu coach. It's just how the sport's evolved. But back then, yeah, we were basically a jiu-jitsu team where guys started fighting.
Yeah. Jiu-jitsu's kind of nullified itself. It's been nullified by wrestling, catch wrestling.
It really has. I mean, it's just, guys, outside of a Charles Oliveira or a Brian Ortega, who's winning fights on their back anymore? People say Damian Maia may be the best jiu-jitsu guy ever in MMA. He wasn't winning fights from his back. He was taking your back, and winning fights. It's just the old saying, the black belt gets punched in the face and turns into a brown belt, punched again, turns into a purple belt. It's kind of true. Yeah.
Your first AFC that you did was in Fort Lauderdale, December 13th, 2002. You had Hermes Franca fight Ryan Diaz as the main event. Do you remember that card in general? Like Wes Sims, Conan, Aaron Riley, Alexandre Barrios, Matt Hume, Sean Payne Peters, Nick Aguilar, Kate Swallows, and Govea versus John Fitch. That is a sick lineup.
Has Hume let go of Payne Peters' arm yet? I haven't checked. Because I remember that night it was really hard to get him to let go.
He still has it.
But that was a crazy night. It's funny because you mentioned Wilson and John Fitch, and I think that was John Fitch's first fight. It was a 205. He made his career at 170, but I remember Wilson landing a big knee in a clinch and knocking Fitch completely cold. And then being at a hook and shoot show, I don't know how many months after that, but it was Fitch against Solomon Hutcherson. Yes. And Fitch ended up down on his hands and knees in a scramble, and Hutcherson got disqualified for soccer kicking him in the head. And Fitch again had to get carried out. So I had seen this guy that I had never heard of twice in a relatively short period of time get just knocked dead. And he was stretchered out, right? I remember looking at somebody standing next to me, he was getting stretchered out in the hook and shoot show and saying, man, this poor guy should find something else to do for a living. And then I remember looking back when the guy won 100 fights in a row, was getting ready to fight GSP for the title. I was like, yeah, I guess I had that guy wrong.
Yeah.
I thought he was wasting his time. I honestly thought he was wasting his time.
Me too.
Now, how did you one of the things is that you're obviously astute with the sport and you see things like that, but how did you handle that when it got personal on your team with because it looked at times where they brought you world beaters from Brazil, as there were so many down there, and then it looked like a couple of the guys may have been friends or closer to the heart, and they're kind of helping out, but they weren't always A-listers. How did you distinguish that, about that, and weed them out or keep them, depending on what your wants were?
I mean, I guess it depends on what point in time you're asking the question. If you ask it from 1995 through 2005, we didn't know what the fuck we were doing. I mean, who did? Seriously, who the hell knew anything about running an MMA team back in the 90s? There was no manual to follow. There was no history to follow. Nobody knew anything. We didn't. I'm surprised we didn't get people killed in training the way we handled things. As far as running the team, back then it was just kind of a fraternity, a boys club, just having fun. You're all your friends. You're trying to keep everybody happy and fitting round pegs in a square holes just to try to, give everybody what they need. That's probably the biggest difference between the first 10 years of our existence and then the last 15 years or so of our existence. We finally, after a period of time, said, fuck, man, this is a real sport. We need to treat our team like a real sport. We need some structure. We need discipline. We need rules. People need to be held accountable, and I mean, if you walk into our gym, we've got coaches who have the training sessions mapped out, the partners mapped out. We've got times that we start, times that we finish, what you're supposed to bring equipment wise. If you come late, go fucking home, go disrespect somebody at home. Don't disrespect our team by showing up late. You don't have your mouthpiece, get the fuck out of here. Go get a mouthpiece. You're chewing gum, get off our mat. You come bringing some friend out of the blue. Hey, this is my buddy. What the fuck? You think the Dallas Cowboy wide receiver brings his friend who plays for the Philadelphia Eagles to training camp to, go run some pass routes? Get the fuck out of here. You're not part of our team. So it's just, we try to run our gym like a professional sports team. This is a major sport. Let's show it the respect it deserves and handle it as such. So for the first 10 plus years, no, we were clueless. We did a really bad job, and, the results kind of showed it. You win some, you lose some. And, now it's gotten so competitive and people are so good and so well trained. It's like, I mean, if you win half your fights at like the UFC level, you're doing a really, really good job. But it really comes down to like which ones you're winning. We've had shows. I mean, we've had 9 people out of 13 fights, that were ATT guys on a UFC show before. But whether you go 7-2 or 2-7, whether it was a good night, depends on which ones you won. I remember one night, I think we went 7-1, but we lost the title fight, and everybody's leaving sad. So, we win a lot more fights now than we used to. But at the highest level, we might win 55% of our fights at the UFC level, maybe on a good year, 58% of it, but it's the ones you win. But back then it was just, we didn't know what the fuck we were doing. And it took us a long time to figure it out. And I think that's maybe one of the advantages we have over a lot of other gyms. We've been around longer than most gyms, and we've done it on a bigger scale. So we've had a lot of opportunities to make mistakes, made a ton of mistakes, but we learned from them. So some of the mistakes other gyms are making right now, we've already made those mistakes and we learned from them. So, I think our advantage is just having made more mistakes than other people.
What is the reason you guys closed your gym to the public?
When COVID hit, obviously everything shut down. We never shut down our pro training though, because, Dana made it pretty clear. I'm not staying shut down for long. I'm going to be opening up for fights as soon as possible. Well, he can't turn the switch on and say, I got a fight next week and not have guys training to be ready for those fights. So we kept our gym open from the day COVID hit, not to the public, but just to our private fighters. And we had cops coming to our door every day, and condo commandos in the area calling in saying there's cars in this parking lot, people, domestic terrorists in there breaking the vaccine rules and the fucking lockdown rules and blah, 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 whatever. But we stayed open and we kept our fighters training. UFC started putting on shows sooner rather than later, so we never missed a beat on that. But, during the period of time where nobody was allowed to have the public involved, people stopped coming. Some places opened up to the public sooner than others, and people started migrating out to other places to train. And then when it became easier and, accepted to open up to the public, I didn't want the public getting in and, getting people sick. I got people training for fights and big fights. I don't want the public around, trying to contain it as much as we can. And then, once it got to the point where everybody was comfortable being around other people, it was just kind of nice having the gym just for the pro fighters. It was like, wow, we used to have, 6 buses bringing kids in, from schools for after school. And, a lot of kids would come for their classes, and other regular people would come for their classes, and they'd bring their brothers and their sisters and their moms and their uncles to watch. And, it's cool having the public there because they feel like they're part of the team and they support your team. And it's kind of cool, but it also wreaks a little bit of havoc in running a pro gym, scheduling around those people. And it's impossible to completely schedule around them, but it just got to the point. I mean, we have just about 100 pro fighters that train out of our gym, and our gym's big. It's 40,000 square feet, but you get 100 fighters in there and all the coaches in there. It's, it fills the place up certain times a day. And it just got to the point where I looked at the money that was being generated by the public coming in and weighed that against, the luxury of not having them there and how much more efficient it made us feel as a fight team doing our job. And I thought, the benefit we got by not having the public there outweighed the benefits of having the public there. So we just never opened back up.
Yeah, like
That's
you've been
interesting.
comparing it to big time sports. It's like most big time sports have closed practices. I mean, they have some open for the public, but most you never get a chance to see them. You know, the real
Yeah, I
practice.
mean, we actually we get a lot of grief from people on the team that want to have an open door policy and bring their friends to train and their spouses to watch them, and we let certain situations in. Hey, I've been here a while. My brother's in town. Can he come watch my training? But man, we got a system set up. If you want to bring somebody in that's not part of our team, you got to get permission in advance. And if we walk in there and see somebody that's not supposed to be there that didn't have permission, we just walk up and tell them to get the fuck out. And we get a little bit of a bum rap for that. They're like, man, what the fuck is this? You guys run this place like a bunch of Nazis? And my answer is no. We run it like professionals. That's what we do. Like you just said, I mean, I give up about 50, 60 grand a month in profit that I could be, putting towards the bills by not staying open to the public. Goddamned if I'm doing that just so everybody can bring their brothers, fathers, sisters, boyfriends, girlfriends, cousins into the gym and, take away the benefits we got by shutting it down to the public.
It's a pretty private thing too. Like, fighting and what takes place in the gym. It's deeply personal. It's very seldom talked about outside of it. And, it's something that should stay behind closed doors for the most part.
I agree.
Not only that, remember the Milicic story. It's also not mainstream, so you could literally have like a ma and pa with their kids kind of be shocked that guy's really going at it. You know what I mean? And I think it was Dave Strasser and Nate Schroeder were doing some wrestling, trying to take each other's pants off, like, goofing around. And they got thrown out of the gym because they scared customers,
Yeah, it's not the easiest thing to mix with regular people who aren't overly exposed to it. I agree.
You guys are I shouldn't say you guys are absolutely getting the cream of the crop of the beginners too. You guys have a guy there right now. He's got a world ranking in judo, Abasov. He's from Turkmenistan. He's 0-0 as a pro. And I think he's moving in over by you guys.
He's a little fucking killer.
He's my 145-pound champion. I have never seen the dedication that he's got. He's your typical Muslim fighter. Incredibly disciplined, dedicated, focused, just never gets off his beaten path.
We have people from all over the world at our gym now. It really is truly a melting pot, to use an old phrase. But and everybody's got their stereotypes about, the Brazilian fighters and the fighters from here and there. I will tell you this about fighters from Russia, from all the stand countries, because I can't even tell the difference between all of them. And we've probably been having guys from that part of the world over for maybe like the last 6 or 7 years. We started to have an influx of them, and we have a lot of them now. I have never had one problem with a Russian fighter. Whether it's a Muslim fighter, whether it's a Christian fighter, not one problem. These guys respect their elders. They respect their teammates. They clean up their shit. They help everybody on the team. They listen to their coaches. We got a guy who runs our gym, Richie Guerriero, who's our general manager. And he just finds it hilarious how much respect these guys have for somebody that's older than them. So he always tries to push the boundaries to see, because he's older than all of them. He'll walk up to the new guys that just walk in the gym and he'll just come out of nowhere and start slapping them. And these guys just cover up and cower up and they're like, no. And these guys are killers that would literally rip him apart if they wanted to. And he's like, they're not going to touch me. I'm older than them. They're just going to show me respect and tell me to stop. And it's like, I just get such a kick out of these guys. They're tough as shit, but they're like the greatest teammates you could ask for. So yeah, and we got quite a few absolute studs that are younger. People don't know about. They're starting to learn about some of them, like the Arman Sarukians and some of those guys. They're Movzar, who's undefeated now in the UFC, just had a really good fight with Dan Ige. But there's some killers in there. But I mean, even when you watch it, you turn on a UFC now, there's like 600 and something people on the roster. You think you're in the business, you think you're an expert in fighting. I don't know half these motherfuckers on these shows. I don't even know who they are, but not a show goes by that I don't watch it and say, holy shit, who is this guy?
Yeah.
Look how good this guy is. It's just, the level of athlete that's now getting involved in the sport. And when you start taking guys that are that athletic and then they start training at a relatively young age, I used to think, wow, how good is MMA going to be when young kids start training this stuff and become fluent in everything, by the time they're adults, this level's going to take off. But I underestimated how important the athleticism is to the sport. And it used to be like, give me a great jiu-jitsu guy. Then it was, give me a good wrestler. And then it was like, oh, just give me somebody who's really well-rounded, has been doing everything since they were a kid. And now it's like, man, give me one of these uber athletes, because, it's just, size matters, athleticism matters. And some of these young guys are coming in here and it's just, it changes the game.
Yeah. Now, wait, I got to sneak in there because Dan left a little door open there. He said these guys from the stands and stuff are no problem in the gym. That means that somebody's been a little bit of a problem at ATT. Why don't you share with us either a Jeff Munson story or some crazy from the 95 to 2000 that you had to deal with? Maybe
Lombard,
maybe a hotel you had to pay for or something.
I mean, there's so many stories of just the nut jobs that we've had through our gym. I mean, for a long time, the barriers to entry to being involved in the MMA business, whether it was as a fighter or a manager or a coach, or starting your team, like the barriers to entry were like zero, and you had a lot of crazy people get involved in the sport. I mean, we had people coming in with fucking guns and, people wanting to throw down, people coming off the street saying, fuck this, you guys are all fake. I'm going to beat all your asses. And, we'd have guys at our gym literally fighting each other for the right to beat the shit out of this idiot because everybody wanted them. It's kind of like that.
Andy Reyes?
Kind of like the Finding Nemo movie when the fish would jump up on the dock and all the seagulls would be like, mine, 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 mine. These idiots would come off the street like the Gracie Challenge type shit. And all the fighters were like, no, I saw him first. I get to kill him. But, it's so different now. People, they treat it with respect. They treat it seriously. They treat it like a real sport. And we've gotten really picky with how we vet people to get in our gym. I mean, it used to be where we'd say, man, where are we going to get the next generation of fighters? And anytime we can find anybody who wants to come to the gym, please come. I don't care what weight you're at, what level you're at. We just need bodies. And now I bet you we probably get 25 legit fighters that are in good promotions with good records a month reaching out to us saying, hey, we'd like to come and check out your gym. And we probably only say yes to a couple, 2 or 3 out of the 25, just because we have limited resources. We don't want to, guy wants to come in. He's, 5-4 in the UFC and maybe a fight away from getting cut. He's a 155 pounder. And we've already got 7 guys in the UFC at 155 pounds. And, it's like, we'll just have to take a pass. It's not a good fit at this time, so we've gotten really picky with how we vet fighters and getting there, how we handle situations on the mat and how we're so different now. Don't have many of those stories anymore, but holy shit, there are too many to remember back in the day.
You've had the police at your door on more than one occasion. That's for sure.
I've had coaches call the cops on fighters back in the day when shit got ugly. I mean, it's like, Thiago Silva ready to brawl with Conan because Conan wouldn't let him beat up Kimbo Slice Kimbo's first day in the gym. It's like just, yeah, there was some crazy days back in the day. You mentioned Hector Lombard. We got lots of Hector stories. There was one guy who was a college wrestler out of Missouri, and he came down with one of our guys who was from Missouri, and he had started MMA training. He's like, I want to go down there. I want to train with Hector Lombard. And this is Bellator Hector back in the day, who was just, and I love Hector. I still love Hector to this day, even though I'd tell him not to come back to the gym anymore, but he's still my friend. But, Hector was kind of nuts, and he liked to go at it. Didn't care who you were, what your weight was, 145 to 245. He's coming at you. And this guy's like, I want to train hard with Hector Lombard. And the guy that brought him down was like, no, you better wait a little bit. Wait until you get acclimated before you try to go with Hector. That's a little bit of a different level and a different animal right there. No, I want to go with him first day. And the guy gets here and he was sick. So he took the first day off. So he's just sitting in the bleachers watching. And we had a K1 guy from Turkey who was in town. It was tough as shit. And somehow or another, it was back when we didn't really put a lot of thought into who was sparring with who and what the consequences could be. It was just kind of like throw them on the mat and see what happens. So Hector and this guy end up getting paired up. And I think it started out as like shadow boxing, but shadow boxing with Hector back in the day could get bloody. So no gloves. These guys start going at it. You know, and back then it wasn't like, holy shit, jump in. It was like, hey, who you got? You know, let's watch. So they start going at it, and they're fucking going hard, but almost like a controlled going hard where they're enjoying it. And this kid that had come down that had never fought and just started training, but, you know, wanted to call out Hector for training, is just sitting there like with his jaw on the bleachers, like, what the fuck are these guys doing to each other? And Hector and this guy are going hard as shit. The fucking bell goes off, the fucking round ends. You know, they just kind of like stare at each other to go their own separate ways. And Hector, you know, are both busted up. And Hector looks at this kid who's just sitting there staring at him. And Hector yells, "Welcome to the jungle, motherfucker." And the kid got up and turned around and left and never saw the kid again. But that's just what went on back in the day. And, you know, if you ask the guys at Militich and the guys at AKA and, you know, the guys at some of those early gyms,
Einstein, yeah,
that's just what happened. You know, it's like, who knew better? You know, now it's like, hey, what size gloves you have? This is Tuesday. You can't have 8-ounce gloves. You need 10-ounce gloves. Go home. You know, but back then it was gloves. What the fuck are gloves for?
Now, let me ask you, there are some guys that were tragic stories that you kind of tried to help out and do some things. I'm remembering, remember Fernando Terere?
Yeah.
Did you bond him out of jail?
I think you probably helped him out a lot. I remember he kind of went nuts on a plane that was landing in Florida. So that's like your land, and you probably and talk about a guy who was elite, you know?
Oh man, highly elite. I got to tell you, I have a hard time remembering what I had for breakfast these days.
Okay.
I couldn't tell you if I did or not.
Okay.
You would ask me something before we went on air and mentioned a couple of stories. I'm like, oh shit, I forgot all about that. Yeah, that happened. I don't remember.
I know there's just too many for you to keep track of. But yeah, Fernando Terere was a guy that I think they said was going to be American top team. And I don't think he ever.
No, he never was.
The doors. Yeah. So man, that's a shame.
What about your dealings with Mark Kerr? Did you ever bond him out of prison?
Put him through rehab a couple of times, never out of jail.
Okay.
Mark was a cool guy. He was a super nice guy. As scary as he was, you know, looking and in the cage, really nice guy. Had his demons, which are well documented.
Yeah.
But you know, I don't think we ever had him fight on any of our shows. Had him down to a bunch of them, talked to him about fighting for a bunch of them, but one thing always led to another, and you know, never came through.
What about Marcus Aurellio? January 11, 2004, he won the ZST Grand Prix. It was kind of, in my opinion, it was not the coming out party of the American top team because you guys have already been there, but it was just kind of like a nice showpiece for the mantle.
That was a big tournament. There were some good guys in that tournament. Big tournament. He won the tournament, and he was really good back in the day. He then signed a deal to go to Pride. And his first fight was, God, I wish I could remember the guy's name. He ended up in the UFC, but he was one of their stars. They obviously wanted the hometown guy to win. They signed a fight at 155 pounds. Aurellio goes over there for the fight. He was a big dude back in the day. Probably walked around at like 190. Cut weight to 155, weighed in for the show, did the pose down, all the stuff. Great. Back to the room, couple IVs. Knock on the door at like 3 a.m. Hey, there's a problem. What's the problem? Fight was supposed to be at 154 pounds, not 155 pounds. No, fight was at 155 pounds. You know, we can get the contract if you need it and show it to you, but it's 155. No, it's supposed to be 154. So he either has to make 154 or we're not going to pay him. And there's no fight. And he can never come back. And back then, I think he was going to make 20 grand for the fight, which was like making $1 million back then. And he's like, they called me up in the middle of the night. And at least it was the middle of the night there. I don't remember what time it was where I was. And they're like, they explained the situation to me. And I'm like, fuck them. What do you mean? He's probably like 170 something right now. And he's like, no, I got to make the weight. I got to fight. I'm like, fuck that. I'll give you the 20 grand not to fight. That's just ridiculous. Fuck those guys. No, they'll never let me fight again. I want to fight. I want to fight. Pride's the best place. And he ended up making weight at like 3:30 in the afternoon, the day of the fight. And I remember him going out to the ring for the fight, and it was like a Gracie train, but it wasn't for show. It was basically holding him up because he could barely walk. He was so fucked up. Then he ends up fighting and loses a split decision, go figure. But yeah, Pride back in the day, it was like, say what you want about Dana White and the UFC. If you got their handshake, those guys have always been gold to me. I don't need anything in writing with anybody at the UFC. Pride, you could have a contract that thick. It doesn't matter what the fuck it says. Those guys just did whatever the fuck they wanted. They would look you right in the eye, stab their mother in the back, and lay odds on which way she fell. So yeah, just an Aurellio story.
Miguel, didn't you have an issue with that? Maybe at the hook and shoot, regards to the 50,000 prize money with the ZST Grand Prix?
Oh, Mike. Yeah, Dan saved the day here. This is one of those times where we were doing a big show really close after that. And, you know, we had fighters in from Finland and from, you know, Europe and stuff, and it's in Florida. And the week of the show, I got to send Dan an email that says, hey, look, this is the cash that's needed for the foreign fighters, so that he brings it and, you know, we can take care of them so that they're not cashing checks for a month. And I forgot that email this show. So it comes to be pay time, and Dan walks in, and Dan goes, Miguel, you know, you forgot the email. And he makes it be like that he didn't have the cash. So I go off to scramble to get my computer, see what I can do, you know, this, that, the other stuff. And when I walk out, Dan pulls out Aurellio's money that he was holding and paid everybody.
we paid him with Aurellio's money?
Yeah. He paid everybody with Aurellio's money. And what I remember too is I came back, you know, with my computer, and Dan was already gone, took care of everybody. The Finnish guys were there. And they were, I was like, what, you know, they're like, no, it's taken care of. And I was like, you know, obviously Dan was way ahead of me, right? But he goes, and Marco goes, yeah, and Dan also called you an asshole.
Funny, I don't remember that, but that sounds like something we would do. So hey, yeah. Aurellio ended up coming in use for something or other. Good for him.
And you said the date on more than one occasion. Back in the day, Mark Laimon used to dub off people's instructional tapes and then sell them on eBay. And he wouldn't stop doing it. He would even like put like his own little header video, like, you know, knocked off by Mark Laimon, ha ha ha, at the beginning of it. And you sued him to get him to stop doing that. Chris Brennan told us that story in our interview. Is there any truth to that?
Did he do that with the ADCCs, Miguel?
He did it, yes.
Yeah.
He didn't.
Is that why you felt okay? I got you.
I remember him doing it with the Abu Dhabi show that we did in San Jose. And I remembered it being a problem. I don't remember what the fuck I did to stop it, but that sounds familiar, so probably true.
Yeah.
Some people just give a fuck, you know?
Yeah, he didn't care.
Now, the other story, similar, like a Dan Save the Day story, there was a big grappling show that went down in North Carolina. I think it was the first time that Royler Gracie grappled. The promotion, I don't remember the name of it. It was run by the Henzo guys from that area. And I think, if I remember correctly, that they claimed to have some type of sponsorship from like Palmolive or some type of big corporate thing like that. That fell through, and they had nothing there. And the tournament went down, and you know, they had Brazilians and people that were getting, you know, a couple $1,000 a match and stuff. And you had to take care of that whole thing. Do you remember that show in North Carolina? I think Saulo Ribeiro, Royler Gracie.
I remember being at a really good grappling show in North Carolina, because I remember Matt Serra had a match with Shaolin, and Shaolin was up on points, and it was coming down to the real end. So Serra was just getting like uber aggressive, you know, just trying to get something, you know, at the end to try to tie it up. and he like lunges at Shaolin. Shaolin hits this crazy shoulder throw. Sarah goes like into the lights, does a flip, lands on his feet, turns around and shoots a double leg. Didn't get it, but it was like the coolest thing I think I'd ever seen in a grappling match in my life. I guess he had that gymnast background, and he was in shape back then. This is before he had ever fought. And I remember it was like, holy fuck, that was cool. So yeah, I remember being at that show. We had a couple guys competing in it. I don't remember who competed, and I don't remember the money issue. But that was probably one and the same.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was an amazing show, and they, sold no tickets, which, was a thing that, happened back then. And again, yeah, everybody went home happy thanks to, Papa Dan. So he doesn't like to take credit for it, and he never did. But, the bottom line is that kind of is what makes him who he is and important. He would probably be happy if we didn't even mention these things, but
yeah, I was just fucking young and making a ton of money back then. When you're young and you start making money, you think you're going to make that amount of money the rest of your life. It's like, who fucking cares? I get to see a really good grappling show. Who cares if I got to throw him a few bucks to help out? Wasn't that big of a deal at the time.
So Dan, we do tons of research on our guests, and when we interviewed Chael Sonnen, I stumbled across XFA 5 that took place January 25th, 2003. Chael Sonnen and Trevor Prangley headlined it. And I looked at the rest of the card. There was like 9 fights total, or 6 fights on the card, with one local guy that had a record of 5-21. So I asked Chael, did you even get paid for this? How many people were there? And he's like, dude, there was like 150 people there. And then I look at the card. I'm like, Edson Dinas and Marcus Aurellio were on it. Did Lambert kind of bail everybody out? And he goes, man, I think you're right. I think he did. Do you remember that card?
Was that show down in South Florida? Was it in West Palm?
Yes.
I remember that show. That was a one and done guy who promoted this. God, I want to say his name was Sean something or other. I remember the guy did the show, and I remember those 2 guys being on it. And I remember the guy calling me like Sunday morning or something, like desperate because he didn't have the money. And yeah, I think I hooked him up.
I'm sitting here in Chicago. How does somebody have the balls to throw a show, lose their ass, find your phone number, and call and ask you to help them?
Like I said, barriers to entry back then, man, they were like zero. There just were none. The people that came in and out of the business back then were just, it's just something else,
Storybook stuff.
I don't know what else to say. There were some real characters back in the day in the sport.
Yeah. What about Marcelo García and Pablo Popovitch? Do you remember watching them grapple at ATT?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they were. Now, as far as grappling with each other, I'm trying to I don't think they were both at the gym at the same time. And I obviously had both of them at the gym at different times, and seeing them both training with both of them. But I don't think they actually crossed paths. I think by the time Marcelo García got down here, Pablo was already gone, I think.
Okay.
We had that match between the two that was, I think, was a super fight on one of the Abu Dhabi trials that we did.
One of your trial shows down in South Florida, they had a match. I think Marcelo won it.
Yeah. I remember you were duly impressed, let's say. I think that was your first time maybe seeing him live. Yeah, do you remember the impact? Because it's like, at that point, you'd seen a lot, but to see a guy like that all of a sudden and opens your eyes again, what did that?
Man, as far as being a competitor, I mean, everybody says who was the best at this, who was the best at that, and there's different levels of being the best. There's guys that, you would see in the gym that you'd put $1 million on in a match in the gym, but then those guys go and compete, and it's just fucking, they don't have it. As far as being a competitor, pound for pound, who was a better competitor at grappling than Marcelo García? I mean, that guy was a fucking animal. He was so good. And then until you feel him on the mat, it's like, once you feel him, you're like, it's just like not of this world. He was so good. And then, obviously we saw what he did in San Jose in that show when we had him at that show. He was, that guy was amazing, just amazing. And what a nice guy. What a great dude he is.
How would you compare him technique-wise to Liborio? How, like Liborio versus Garcia? Those are two of the. How would you compare him technique-wise to Liborio? We asked Mike Brown. I felt I had Mike Brown. He said Garcia was the best, and I was like, hey, I got you. Everybody says Liborio's the best, and he said Garcia's closer to my size. But you felt both of them. Like, compare them for real fans. Like, who's like how different?
Size and strength matters. You know, Liborio was, man, that guy was fucking strong as a bull, explosive as a bull. His grip was crazy. It's hard to compare grapplers with different body types. You know, Liborio was short and stocky and thick, and it just, if you ask me if those two competed, yeah, if they competed in the gym in a friendly little match at the gym with nobody watching, Liborio would win. If they competed in a tournament, I'd put my money on Marcelo Garcia all day. And, Liborio probably would too. I remember being at the gym one day when Liborio was training with Jeff Munson and just fucking submitting them 10 times in 5 minutes. And then as soon as the match was over, and I said, hey, Lebo, if you guys competed in the final of Abu Dhabi tomorrow, what do you think would happen? He'd say Jeff would win 2-0. And he probably would have. Jeff was a fucking competitor. When it came time back then and the bell sounded, that was it. That was his fucking world. So, different types, and I've trained with a million guys of all levels. Those are obviously two of the best, but, I'd say, this was the best point guy I ever trained with. This was the best submission guy I ever trained with. This was just the strongest guy I ever trained with. And, a lot of those guys you may never have heard of, that never fought, never did anything, or never even competed. Mm-hmm. I mean, the best submission guy that I ever rolled with in my life is the guy from MMA Masters, Daniel Valverde. I mean, fuck, just unbelievable. And he's still doing it all these years later. I hear he's still fucking wrecking everybody down there. Just unbelievable submissions, unbelievable submissions. But doesn't mean he'd win in a tournament against someone. He might lose by advantage. You mentioned Pablo Popovitch's name. Pablo was a great grappler, ended up beating Marcelo eventually in one of the ADCs. But, Pablo was a point guy. He was a position guy. He was, big, strong wrestler and just good top position, and that's how he won just about all of his matches. So just different styles.
What about meeting Mike Brown? When did you know he was going to be a good fit, as a coach for you guys?
Probably about when I guess he was training with us for maybe like the last 7-8 years of his career. And probably about halfway through, you watch a guy and how he analyzes things, how he pays attention, how he participates in class, how he handles himself around the other guys. We really try to groom our coaches from our fighters. It's just, do you have to be a great fighter to be a great coach? Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, most guys that are great fighters are just so naturally good at it. A lot of them don't take the time to learn all the particular details themselves because they don't need it, much less gets a good enough grasp to teach it to other people and analyze what would be best for their games. But Mike was just such a student of the game. He was just such an MMA nerd. I mean, it's just all he wants to do in life and all he loved in life was that. And probably about halfway through his career, I approached him and said, hey, man, I think you would be a really good coach when this is all said and done. So I'll tell you what, when you got a couple of years left, let me know. And we'll start putting you on the payroll and let you start coaching part-time. That because coaching is so different than fighting, your camps will probably get, farther in between. You're going to slow down over the last couple of years. Start coaching, start following the coaches around, start going to fights, cornering guys and learning how to be a coach so that when you retire, you'll have a little bit of a head start. And he did and took to it like a duck to water. And he's an amazing coach and a great asset to our team. And, we did the same thing with King Mo. We did the same thing with Thiago Alves. It hasn't worked out with some of the coaches that we did it with. And some of the fighters we thought would become good coaches, they didn't. They're no longer around. But, Mike was a home run. King Mo's doing great. Thiago Alves is doing great. Steve Mocco started as a fighter for us, and now
Steve Mocco,
and he's doing amazing.
He's underrated, in my opinion.
You talk about certain guys just you can't replace. People have asked me, hey, if a meteor was going to hit the gym, you can only grab a couple of coaches. Who are you grabbing, and hauling ass with to start over? And I'm like, well, fuck. I'd probably have to grab Brownie. And, Mocco is just, it's not just how great of a wrestler he was. It's just how good of a coach he is, how dedicated he is. The fact that he's 240 or 50 fucking pounds, and no matter who walks through that gym, he can take him down and beat the shit out of him and put some respect into him if he needs to. It's just a combination of all of it. He's amazing.
Yeah. And, if you feel comfortable talking about this, great. If not, we can edit it out. I had thought Robbie Lawler winning the first world UFC title for the American Top Team, I thought he was going to be a mainstay, and really, it seemed like he was becoming a part of the family. And then one day he up and leaves, but there's really not a lot online as to why.
Sometimes you're close with people until you're not. He had a great run at the gym. I think when he came to our gym, I think he had lost like 4 out of 5 fights at Strikeforce, and they basically gave him a shot to go in and win or leave the UFC when they acquired him. And he went in there and he fucking went on a run, man, found his groove and won a lot of fights and made a bunch of money and won a title. And it was great for the team and it was great for him. But, after his fight with Woodley, who, was part of the team as well, he just decided he didn't want to be there anymore. So what are you going to do?
How have you managed that? Like you had talked about gyms making mistakes. You guys are kind of ahead of the curve because you've been there and done that. One of the big issues you see, even with AKA, is they want 2 fighters from the same gym fighting, and then there's a whole bunch of drama, and like that weighs, like it weighs on the other people of the gym. You guys have somehow managed to avoid that.
I wouldn't go so far as say we've avoided it. I mean, it happened with, Robbie and T Wood fought for a UFC title. When it was over, Robbie left the gym after that. Was it because of that? Yeah, who knows? Sometimes it's just time to leave. We've had 2 people fight for the $1 million in the PFL finale. We've got Conan's son is fighting Omar.
A stud.
He is a stud. He's fighting a long mainstay of our gym, Omari Akhmedov, in the first round of the playoffs in a few weeks. And it's for the money. And I was at the gym today and, Josh Silvera's in the cage and, we got the cage wrapped up for some privacy because he's fighting and Omari's in the back room. And what we do when guys are fighting each other is we sit the guys down when it's inevitable and we say, okay, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to separate coaches. We're going to separate training partners. You guys can separate time of the day if you want to and come at different times. It is what it is. It sucks, but it's unavoidable in a situation like this. And sometimes it goes great. And the guys are like, fuck, no problem. I'll train with you if you want to. I don't give a fuck. And they handle it great. And sometimes it's hard for people to deal with. I think I just saw an interview with Amanda Nuñez that said part of the reason she decided to leave is because she didn't like having Kayla Harrison in there thinking they might have to fight at some point in the future. And she didn't feel comfortable. It happens. I've had people come to me in the gym and say, hey, I don't want you to bring in other 170 pounders in the UFC into the gym because I'm a 170 pounder in the UFC. And I'm like, well, if I took one person from every fucking weight class in the gym, A, you'd have nobody to train with, and B, I could do it out of my fucking garage. Why do I have a 40,000 square foot fucking gym? And C, what the fuck do I do when you fucking leave? Because you got married or fucking transferred or sick or tired or cut or whatever. Fuck you. Nobody at our gym is bigger than the team. If there's people that are good fits for us, we bring them in. Not everybody's meant for a big team atmosphere. Some people are better off being, bigger fish in a smaller pond. I don't think that's a real great mentality for long-term success. I think what makes our gym good is not the walls or how nice it's decorated or how big it is. And I don't even think it's how good the coaches are. I think it's the environment that we have with a lot of really, really good quality training partners. And it's very well structured so everybody can take advantage of it and get better every day. I think that's the key to it, but that's not for everybody. Not everybody wants that. We have a guy who competes at 125 pounds in the UFC right now named Muhammad Mokaev. And the guy was like 25-0 as an amateur, like at the highest level amateur shit they would do over in Europe. countries would compete against each other. And he turned pro, and he's also undefeated. He's 1-0 in the UFC. He's getting ready to fight on the London card in maybe like another 14 days or something like that. And he was trained in other gyms, and he says, man, I was like the best at everything in my gym. I'm the best wrestler, I'm the best striker, I'm the best grappler at my gym. How am I going to get better? So he's like, I had to come here because I have, I come here and I'm training with Kyoji, and I'm training with Pantoja, and I'm training with Adriano Moraes and Pedro Munoz. And he's like, and all these great guys are on my weight class, and I'm getting better every day because I have to survive, but that's not, and that guy's going to be a star. I think he's going to be amazing, but some people aren't good for that. They get in there in a bigger environment, and, they don't feel comfortable. They get anxious. They look for ways to dip out of training and stuff. It's just not for them. They'd be better off going to a smaller gym and being the big dog there and not getting pushed. And it's for them. I don't think it's, like I said, I don't think it's a recipe for long-term success. If you're not going to get uncomfortable and get pushed in your own gym, how are you going to respond when you get uncomfortable and pushed, in a cage in front of 15,000 people? But that's just my opinion.
Do you have a third party come in to kind of handle disputes? I mean, you had mentioned, you had T. Wood, Robbie Lawler, Masvidal, Colby, all within title shot, like range, and while one of them's wearing it, and you guys have them all in the same gym. Do you guys have like a third party just to kind of come in and play HR, or is that your job?
That's my job.
Oh my God.
We got a lot of people at our gym. We got a lot of people with a lot of experience at the gym, and it's relationship based. There might be somebody that there's an issue with that I don't have the greatest relationship with, and maybe it's not best for me to go sit the guy down and talk to him and go through the issue or lay down the law or try to set him straight. So maybe it's a Conan situation or something that Richie handles, or maybe like one of his coaches. Usually it's me. That's kind of my job most of the time, and shit comes up. But you know what? You sit down, you go over it, you resolve it. If you can't get it resolved, you show them where the door is. I don't have contracts with anybody at our gym. If you want to be here, come on in and let's train. As long as it's good for the gym and good for you, stay. If it's not good for you, or if it's not good for us, the door's right there. If you want to leave, leave. If we want you to leave, we're going to tell you to leave. And we're not shy about it anymore. I used to, like I said, I used to try to make a lot of round pegs fit in square holes, and it just doesn't fucking work. It's either, if you got a little bit of a cancer, if in my opinion, there's a little bit of a cancer growing, fucking get rid of it before it spreads. And if somebody at the gym doesn't want to be there anymore because they don't feel comfortable in their situation, doesn't matter if you fight in the prelims, if you're fighting an indie show, a little small local show, or you're a champion in the UFC. If it's not good for you, you shouldn't be there. Yeah. You don't have to come up with a reason. You don't have to explain it to us. Just say it's not good for me. Go somewhere else. Sometimes change is good just for the sake of change.
Let's talk about AEW. You've obviously transitioned. You're one of the characters in AEW, and we're wrapping up. I know we've taken a lot of your time. Japan, you had mentioned when we started this interview, you were really into the Japan pro wrestling scene and how it crossed over for shoot fights. Do you think mixed martial arts here in the United States, as we know it, will eventually cross over?
It's funny because, being involved in both, you get the different perspectives. And there's a percentage of fans who love MMA and hate pro wrestling, and love pro wrestling and hate MMA. There's a percentage of pro wrestlers who hate MMA, and there's a percentage of MMA fighters who hate pro wrestling. But there's also a huge, huge group of people that really like both.
Yeah.
There's a ton of guys in the AEW locker room who all they want to do is grab me and talk MMA. And there's a lot of guys at my gym that want to talk pro wrestling, that love wrestling. And there's a lot of fans that are fans of both. I think the ones that hate one or the other are a very loud minority. As far as crossover, it already has. Between Ronda Rousey and Brock Lesnar and things of those nature, CM Punk, you got people doing both. You got people that are emulating each other. At one point, the UFC tried to distance themselves so far from professional wrestling because they were getting regulated, they were getting sanctioned, they were trying to get gambling, to become the norm. And they didn't want to be associated with something that was scripted. We can't let people think that this is scripted, or how can they bet? And I think they were very conscious of how important it was to have betting on the sport, because it brings a lot of new eyeballs into the sport. As a matter of fact, I remember being backstage after Thiago Alves lost to GSP at UFC 100, and somebody calling me and saying, "Hey, dude, you guys left your flag out at the cage." We used to always bring our flag and drape it on the cage. And I'm like, "Oh, fuck, that's our flag. That thing's been all over the world. We used to use the same flag for every fight." So I'm walking back out trying to find our flag when Brock is fighting Frank Mir in the main event. And the fight's actually going on, and I'm walking around the cage looking for our flag. And I finally find it, and the fight wasn't long. The fight's over, and I'm standing next to a higher up in the UFC, and Brock cuts that promo he cut at the end of that fight, pulled the lucky horseshoe out of his ass, beat him over the head with it, drink a Coors Light or roll my
Miller Lite.
Epic fucking promo. And like there was steam coming out of this guy's ears. He was so upset at Brock cutting that promo because he didn't want to blur the lines of the real UFC and the scripted wrestling. And I looked at him and said, "You don't even smell that, do you?" And he's like, "Smell what?" And I'm like, "The fucking money that's coming out of that cage right now from that promo. You don't even fucking understand it. You're just so blindly hate everything wrestling. You're a fucking moron." And I mean, Brock was such a huge draw, in part because of some of that. But over the years, they've obviously softened up on it. And, you've had some characters come out and try to cut some MMA, pro wrestling type storylines. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But, sometimes it works in wrestling and sometimes it doesn't. It really comes down to when it's your personality and it's really you and it's the real you coming across, people buy into it. When it's not, people don't. I mean, Conor McGregor, the guy's got a shit ton of charisma. He talks shit. He's great at talking shit. And it seems natural when he does it. Then you got somebody else doing it. And, somebody might listen to something like that Henry Cejudo says, and they might not think it sounds, real natural, and they might not buy into it, but it's no different than professional wrestling. So yeah, I'd say it's already crossed the lines and blurred the lines.
They share a lot of the same executives. Like one executive will leave one organization to go to the other. Their business model is somewhat similar. I hope one day they're sharing talent, truth be told.
I can't tell you how many times over the last 25 years an issue came up, whether it was talent relations or promotional wars or other issues. And I'm watching it in MMA and I'm like, I've already seen this movie before. 1982 WWE, Vince McMahon and this, and I've already seen this before. I already know how it's gonna end. It's like, fuck, these guys don't know the history of pro wrestling, or they would have learned from it and applied some of it to MMA, because it's amazing how much crossover there really is. And I was just telling people last week in the locker room at AEW that it's funny how similar the personalities are, between the fighters and the pro wrestlers backstage. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Talk about education. The amount of fighters that I have met that came right out of prison at some point or another that'll sit here and say, "Well, I really like this and that about Europe, and in Russia they kind of do this. I really enjoy that as well." There's components of life that people that are maybe not have a high level of school education have, that just absorb and suck up because of the sport of fighting. It's incredible how educating and how it just brings people together from all different cultures.
There's no doubt about it. What does Dana say? It's in our DNA and everybody loves it. I mean, if you're driving down the road and two bums get in a fight on the side of the road, what do? You
you're gonna watch that.
You hit your brakes and you're watching it.
Yeah.
I mean, you might go and see the highest level of MMA in the world on a daily basis, but two people get in a fight, fuck, I'm in. I want to watch it. It's just the way we are.
There's a comedian with a great line that nobody ever left the fist fight to go watch the band play.
Ain't no doubt about it.
In regards to, you kind of rewind and two things. In regards to the Muslim fighters that you talked about, I don't think there's been more of an educational tool for the rest of America in regards to the Muslim community and what their culture is all about than has been brought about by fighting. Like, it has really opened up a lot of people's eyes and created healthy conversations.
I mean, at the end of the day, people are people, right?
Yeah.
Are they different in different parts of the world based on how they're raised and what they believe? Yeah, they are. And if I was born in fucking Afghanistan in some fucking cave and raised by people who told me to hate America and America is the enemy, I'd probably think that, but that's a small percentage of that community and that population in the world. The guys at our gym, it's just they get there and they're all ATT, they're all teammates and they're all helping each other. And it's cool as shit. And I think like it goes back to what you said, there's something about fighting that's just different than other sports and certainly other regular jobs, that these guys are in there. They're training hard. They're working hard. They're learning from each other. And, people think MMA is an individual sport, and it might be 3 Saturdays out of a year, but the other 362 days of the year, MMA is a team sport, and you need you guys on your team. You need the coaches, you need your teammates, you need everybody to help you to get you to where you want to be. And inside the gym, there's a real high level of respect and camaraderie that, I'm sure it exists in other sports to a certain degree, but I don't think it reaches the same level than it does in fighting.
No. Let's close with Kimbo Slice. Who brought Kimbo to the gym? What was he like while he was there?
I'll answer the second part first because I don't remember who brought him to the gym.
I think assume it was Masvidal.
Probably was.
Yeah.
Super humble, super cool, super quiet. Just respected everybody. I mean, he gave that promo he cut after his Ken Shamrock fight in Bellator, where he said, I think it's probably one of the biggest pops I've ever had in MMA, one of the coolest things I've ever seen. He said something, then he goes, ATT Oos, and he like bowed and said Oos. And I said, that's fucking Kimbo Slice bowing and saying Oos. He was super cool. Everybody at the gym absolutely loved him, maybe outside Thiago Silva. But super good guy. I mean, just a great guy.
How did he adapt to training there? Because he was like in his 40s when he became famous, and that's a deep pool to jump into.
It's an incredibly deep pool, and you saw him fight. I wouldn't want to go backyard with him and throw hands. Fuck that. But I mean, him at the gym. I mean, trying to do jujitsu and doing things like that. I mean, what are you going to do at 40 years old, beat up? Come on. I think what he was able to accomplish in the sport was pretty fucking cool considering how old he was when he got into it and how late he got into it in the game. And, he won a little bit in the UFC, won some in Bellator, made a bunch of money. But fuck, I mean, you walk into our gym, one of the first pictures we have hanging up on the wall is a picture of Kimbo Slice, walking into the Bellator cage wearing his shorts with an ATT logo on it. And fucking everybody at the gym's proud of that.
Another one, you guys had Butterbean with the American Top Team logo on his
Butterbean was great.
Dude, he is so not. Watch his fight with Cabbage Carrera, the first one. Cabbage swore he was going to stand with him. Cabbage knocked his teeth out, allowed him to remove his mouthpiece, spit the shards out, put it back in, and they continued to fight. Butterbean's legit.
He was legit as hell. That's another guy you don't want to get hit by.
Yeah, no. I got one memory too that you got to confirm a rumor for me. This was after we had done our run of shows together. You received a phone call from Vlad, the Russian promoter, and you were like, Miguel, why don't you go? I gave your phone number to these guys. Why don't you go check out? And we did the Euphoria shows, and I think you came to the Euphoria shows.
I did,
like with a little bit of freedom and having fun. You know what I mean? Because Atlantic City, I heard rumors that you guys got the suites at the hotel. You cleared out all the furniture, and ATT did some tournaments up there. Now, please confirm.
That is 100% true. I mean, hotel rooms back in the day did not like us very much because if it was a small hotel room, we were going at it in those rooms. If it was a big room like a suite in New Jersey, and I used to like to gamble a lot, and in New Jersey they don't get a lot of big gamblers, so you don't have to be the biggest gambler in the world to get like these giant 12,000 square foot rooms. And man, we got up there for one of the Euphoria shows, saw that. Oh man, let's move all the furniture out. I mean, Minotauro was the Pride champion, and he's in there with a circle of guys going at it with guys, and people were betting. We were just betting on shit. Whether the guys were just who can pass whose guard, who can submit who. Well, fuck it, let's fight. Let's see who goes. Let's go anything. it was just fun, you know. The people in the neighboring rooms didn't like it. We'd get knocked
Underneath.
on the door, security, but yeah, that's all true.
Well, I'm glad you had fun too. I'm sure was there any broken furniture anytime it got out of hand or anything like that, or everything stayed
all the time. All the time. I remember being at one of your I think it was one of your hook and shoot shows. You guys had like a Ramada that you always used. And I remember going at it with Padumpa, who's our head jiu-jitsu coach. And he had just come over. Maybe he wasn't there that long at the time. And we start going at it in the room, talking shit. And all right, let's go. And he jumps guard. And I remember he jumps guard, and we were like right by the bathroom. And the bathrooms at that Ramada, the sink was outside the bathroom. There was like a little small bathroom, and then outside the bathrooms where the sink was. And he jumps guard like right by there. And I looked at him, I said, dude, I think this is your first hotel fight. You don't ever jump guard in a hotel fight. And I had him like underneath the sink and trying to get his head tied up in the pipes and shit. And he like goes to throw an elbow, and he breaks the porcelain part of the thing. And then I'm grabbing that and hitting him in the head with it. And it's just, yeah, we were young and stupid, but fuck, we were having fun.
Yeah, no, that's all.
Yeah, when the boss is breaking the hotel furniture, it's a kind of a hard club to get thrown out of. Do you know what I mean? It's like you really got to fuck up bad.
Yeah.
Since you mentioned Minotauro and Evansville, then I guess I'll close with this story. And that was when we did Rogerio Minotauro's debut there.
That was his first fight.
With a big team. Do you remember what happened the day after that show? I
don't.
Okay, cool. This is a good story. This is classic Dan, because you can tell he's demanding in for his team and stuff like that, and he's a good boss, right? So he sponsored the show, and Saturday we had all the big fights, and we did a matinee show Sunday. And Dan didn't stay for the matinee show. He got the team back on the plane, and they took off for Florida. And he calls me, and he goes, Minotauro left the pride belt up there.
Oh shit.
And he goes, I just want you to go grab it, take it to the airport, here's the account number, and FedEx it back to me. I need it. And I was like, great. I'll get to it tomorrow or after the show. We got a show going on. Dan was like, no, I need you to do it now. So I got to the show late. It's the only time he actually pulled rank on me. He's a great boss, but I love that. So we got him the belt, and he had to go back to Brazil, the plane and stuff. But yeah, he had left the pride belt. He's forgetful, I guess.
Surprised he fucking made the plane in the first place.
Yeah.
Mike,
Dan,
you want to wrap up?
Absolute gentleman. Your contributions to the sport are much greater than what we had mentioned today, and we sincerely appreciate your time, man.
Well, nice to go over some old stories with guys that have been around a long time. It's changed a lot, but it's been a pretty fun ride, right?
Yeah,
for sure.
Definitely.
For sure.
Again, and yeah, thank you from me, for myself personally, for everybody in the sport. Definitely thank you. You're still going to go down generally unrecognized for your contributions. There's no way to really quantify it. And your humility doesn't help.
We just want to win fights.
Everything, yeah. And that's the bottom line is thank you very much, man. And thank you for the interview.
All right, guys, take care. Thank you.
Deep dive number 123, 122, something like that in the books. Dan Lambert. I think that's a historical one because he's a behind the scenes guy. I think this long interview is a chance to get to know him. Like a lot of people have never, may never met him or heard of him. He's a mysterious figure. If you follow ATT, you probably know him, and he's, become more personable and been more out in front. But I think it was a good chance to, really get into one of the best minds in MMA. To me, one of the best minds in MMA. You know what I mean? It's like, this guy is a genius, and it would have been interesting to see if he had bought the UFC, if that worked out, where we'd be today. It'd be something completely different than where we are, but it would probably be successful. I'll tell you that. This guy doesn't fail at much.
Well, the thing with Dan Lambert is he's one of the harder interviews to prepare for because a lot of the inner working stuff of the American Top Team, he's not going to give answers where he sticks his neck too far out there. And then he doesn't give many interviews. Like, he gives interviews to people he knows, and if he doesn't know you, he's not giving it to you. So it's kind of a flex on our end. And the way I describe Dan Lambert to people is, you might have a Lamborghini driving down the street. You see the outside and the interior. It's just gorgeous and you can gawk at it. But the engine underneath the hood is what makes that car special. And to pretend that he wasn't laying the foundation in between the bricks, if he wasn't putting the mortar in between them, like, you just don't know mixed martial arts that well, because he was there from the beginning. And, you know, I've been at regional shows where you hear people, well, I've done this for the sport. I've done that for the sport. There's very few people that have lost as much money as Dan Lambert with the sport of mixed martial arts. Like, it's...
And you never hear him tout it, you know what I mean? He's never sitting there having a pity party for himself over, you know, the money he's lost. But maybe, you know, in private, at times he has some regrets about throwing so much away or whatever. But, you know, you never hear him out in public being like, oh, I got killed on that one, or, oh, you know, throwing himself in there or anything like that. I think what you're talking about is a guy who's passionate for the sport. And I think that's the thing to be grateful for, is when someone that has the resources he has and is able to help. You know, ATT is formidable. The shows that were run, the fighters that he brought up, you know, all, you know, owe him a debt of gratitude, and as well as many other promoters, and, you know, save the day kind of thing. I think found it interesting, and you get some real interesting as to the way this man's mind works, right? So you don't really remember many things about any of the incidents, really. You know, if you notice in the interview, he didn't get too many details. But he's also HR for the thing, you know, so it's like, yeah, you know, he so I understand, and I do understand it, because obviously that's an ongoing business, and that's, you know, there's the privacy too. The way he handles things is why he is where he is, and he'd prefer to keep that, you know, under the hood of the Lamborghini. And that's okay, right. You know.
But Miguel, let's also kind of reflect on some of our past interviews. I don't want to say any names, but we've had interviews where we've stopped the person from telling stories about Dan, because we had felt that all it would do is encourage other people with their hands out, contacting him out of the blue, just kind of begging for, you know, a scrap. And, you know, we didn't think that was right. Like, he's genuinely, I know 3 people that he's paid for surgeries for. And I'm not talking like little surgeries, like 6-figure surgeries. And he's never asked for a public thank you. He hasn't asked for a single thing other than, I got you covered.
Yeah, you know, he's a guy different than anybody else in the business. And this is what makes him different to me as a sponsor. The passion's there, right? But what makes ATT different than, you know, Greg Jackson's? You know, Jackson has also had situations where, you know, fighters are training, you know, maybe to fight each other, or, you know, for title fights. And, you know, the gym became small. They had to get, you know, time for John Jones alone and stuff like that. And even top line fighters felt, you know, maybe a little bit isolated. Dan's income doesn't come from MMA. Whatever he does outside of that, you know, that made him his fortune, it's not from MMA. And that makes him pretty powerful, because in a situation where ATT is really mushroomed in Florida, where they actually have several facilities, you could train, you know, Dean Thomas's version of ATT, or, you know, at the Coral Springs building.
Ralph Garcia, they got them all over.
And part of that is because he, you know, supported those on the way up in the grassroots, you know, way. So yeah, he's a formidable, like I said at the beginning of the interview, easily to me a top 10 most influential person in the sport, as we're documenting it. So thank you, Dan. Thank you for everything you've done, and thank you for the interview, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So ladies and gentlemen, if you could like, share, subscribe, we're going to bring more content like this. And by the time you hear this, we're hoping to have something very special locked down. We're hitting some pretty good numbers. You know, to Miguel and Chris, we're just like, well, they're not good enough, but they're decent. They're decent enough to where people are noticing, and it's getting our brand out there. So If you like this, you think it's special, you've got to like, share, and subscribe it. Leave comments throughout, the video. Vegan Higgler, we've got, Mike Crane, Sec Pros Inc., MMA Purist. Those are people that are really going out of their way to, make sure our show is heard, and it's greatly, greatly appreciated. So
check out the full interview on iTunes, Spotify, and all major podcast platforms.